Do you remember when the river carried your soul and the desert kept your name? Tonight, we will live life in ancient Egyptian myths. The Nile will open its mouth to us, and the gods will walk again in the corridors of memory. Each myth is not a tale, but a mirror, a reflection of what we once were and what we might still be. But before we begin this journey, don't forget to subscribe this channel and comment name of your hometown. Leave your whispers in the comments. And if this story speaks to you, light a candle with a like. Now, get comfortable. The past is waiting. In the beginning there was only silence, a silence so vast it felt eternal. And in that silence stretched the boundless waters of none. The waters were not rivers and not seas, but the infinite possibility of all things. An ocean without end, without surface, without depth. Within it drifted the unborn world, wrapped in sleep, waiting for the first spark to break the endless night. Out of this timeless sea there rose a mound, small as a ripple and yet mighty as destiny. And upon that mound appeared Atom, the one who brought himself into being. He stood alone, neither man nor god nor star, yet all of them at once, and his breath carried the scent of beginnings. He looked across the waters and felt the weight of solitude, for he was complete yet aching, whole yet yearning, filled with all but companionless. So from himself he drew out life, shaping Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. They came forth not as children born of flesh, but as emanations of his longing, bright flames within the endless dark. And in their union lay the first harmony of existence. Shu lifted the sky upon his arms, and Tefnut softened the harshness with her tears of dew. Together they stretched themselves into the vastness, and from their embrace came Geb, the earth, rich and fertile, and Nut, the sky, veiled in stars. Geb lay beneath, heavy and grounded, and Nut arched above, her body bending into eternity, jeweled with constellations that glimmered like fire upon obsidian. Their love was fierce and unyielding, and they clung together so tightly that there was no space for creation to breathe. Atom, watching with the wisdom of necessity, commanded Shu to separate them. With gentle force Shu lifted Nut into the heavens and pressed Geb down to the soil. And thus came the space where life might rise. The distance between earth and sky became the cradle of time. And into that cradle the rhythms of day and night began to flow, like a pendulum that would never cease. From Geb and Nut came for children who would shape the destiny of all things. Osiris, Isis, Seth, and Nephthys. They were not merely born but unveiled, each carrying a fragment of truth too large for mortals to bear. Osiris, green of skin and eternal as the river, brought fertility, order, and the promise of renewal. Isis, radiant and sorrowful, held the secret names of the gods and the wisdom of healing. Seth, fierce as the desert storm, embodied chaos, violence, and the breaking of bonds. Nephthys, shadowed and tender, was guardian of the night and companion of the grieving. Together they formed a family bound by love and rivalry, unity and fracture, for in their story lay the eternal balance of harmony and discord. The people of the Nile, when they first told these myths, did not see them as distant legends, but as mirrors of the world that surrounded them. The rising of the sun was Ra journeying across the heavens. The flooding of the river was Osiris returning in abundance. The withering of the desert was Seth's rage across the horizon. Each dawn was a birth, each dusk a death, and in every cycle they saw the endless dance of gods and men entwined. To live was to reenact the story, to die was to step into it, and to be remembered was to join it forever. The temples carved into stone were not only houses of worship, but vessels of memory, where each pillar, each hieroglyph, each flicker of the torch was part of the same eternal song. Yet beneath this grandeur lay fragility. For in the myths of Egypt, there was always the whisper of loss, of things broken and remade, of love torn apart and pieced together again. The gods were not flawless rulers dwelling far away, but beings of sorrow and sacrifice who reflected the struggles of the living. Atom's loneliness, Geb's longing, Nut stretching across eternity, Osiris's death, Isis's tears, Seth's fury, Nephthys' silence, each was a fragment of human heartache, turned sacred. This was why the people knelt before their statues and left offerings of bread, beer, and flowers, for in honoring the gods, they were honoring their own grief, their own fragile endurance against the desert winds of time. Imagine standing at dawn upon the banks of the Nile as the first light turns the river into liquid gold. The reeds sway and the ibis calls out across the mist. In that hour, the ancients believed Ra himself was being born anew from the body of Nut, sailing forth upon his solar bark, guided by Mart, the goddess of truth. Each sunrise was not merely the turning of the earth, but a resurrection, a victory of light against shadow. And each sunset was not merely the dimming of day, but a reminder that all light must pass through darkness. The world was alive with gods, and the gods were alive within the world. But even in this radiant cycle, shadows stirred. For the balance between order and chaos was delicate, and each dawn carried within it the risk of failure. Beneath the river lurked Apophis, the great serpent of disorder, who sought to devour the sun before it could rise. Each night, Ra descended into the underworld, facing Apophis in battle, guarded by the prayers and spells of mortals carved into tomb walls and whispered by priests at midnight. Without these prayers, without these memories, the serpent might triumph, and the world would sink back into Nun's silence. Thus the people believed their voices mattered, that their faith was a thread woven into the very fabric of survival. To live was not passive, it was participation in the eternal struggle, each heart a candle pushing back the dark. And so the myths remind us that creation was not a single moment long ago, but an endless act, repeated every day, every season, every life. It was not merely gods who shaped the cosmos, but humans, whose remembering and honoring gave the story's breath. Each offering at a shrine, each name spoken, each stone lifted to build a temple, all of it was part of the same sacred weaving. To forget was to let the serpent rise. To remember was to let the sun ascend again. Creation, destruction, mourning, renewal, all flowed like the river, all bound to the endless story. Thus begins our journey into the ancient Egyptian myths, not as spectators, but as participants. We stand with Atum on the first mound. We breathe with Shu and Tefnut. We stretch with Geb and Nut. We are born with Osiris and Isis, Seth and Neph. And as the sun rises upon the Nile, we awaken not into history, but into memory, into a truth too vast to be told once, a truth that must be lived again and again. This is the beginning, and it is only a whisper of what is to come. The story of Osiris began not with triumph, but with stillness, with the weight of kingship pressed upon his shoulders like the sun upon stone. He was the ruler of Egypt, green-skinned and eternal, and under his reign the land flourished. The Nile rose in abundance, fields shimmered with grain, and people lived in harmony with Mahat, the balance of order and truth. His wife, Isis, walked beside him, a goddess of wisdom whose love was a flame that never dimmed. Together they became the axis of the world. Heaven and earth joined in tenderness. Yet harmony is fragile, and where there is growth, there is envy. Where there is light, there is shadow. His brother, Seth, red-skinned and fierce, looked upon Osiris with eyes of fire. Seth was lord of the desert, of barren lands and violent storms, and he envied the fertile realm his brother ruled. Envy grew in him like a serpent uncoiled, until it became not merely desire but rage. Seth did not strike in open battle. He chose cunning, a mask of celebration to conceal his treachery. He crafted a chest of cedar inlaid with gold, shaped in secret to the exact measurements of Osiris. At a feast he brought forth this chest, gleaming under torchlight, and declared it a gift for whoever would fit within it. One by one the guests climbed inside, laughter ringing, but none matched its form. When Osiris lay down within it, perfect to its shape, Seth and his conspirators slammed the lid shut, sealed it with molten lead, and hurled it into the Nile. The river swallowed the chest, carrying it away like a coffin borne upon eternal waters, and Osiris was gone. The land shuddered. The flood ceased. Crops withered. For the king who was life itself had been silenced. Isis wept. Her tears fell upon the dust like dew, and she wandered across the earth in search of her beloved. She searched among reeds and marshes, through villages and temples, following whispers, following the current of grief. At last the chest came to rest at Byblus, in a foreign land, lodged within the trunk of a great tree. The tree grew swiftly, encasing the chest within its wood, until it became part of the palace of a foreign king. Isis, disguised and patient, entered the court as a nursemaid to the children of that house. At night she laid the child in the fire, stripping away his mortal weakness. But when the queen discovered her and cried out, Isis cast off her disguise. She shone with divine light, her wings spreading across the chamber, and the king and queen fell trembling. She asked only for the chest within the tree. With reverence they gave it to her, and she bore it away, her arms wrapped around it as if cradling her lover once more. Yet Seth was not content to let grief rest. When he found Isis had reclaimed Osiris, he seized the body, tore it into 14 pieces, and scattered them across the land, across river and desert, as though he would tear existence itself apart. But Isis was unyielding. She roamed the breadth of Egypt, gathering each fragment, mourning over each broken piece. Nephthys, her sister, joined her. For though wife to Seth, she was bound in compassion to the sorrow of Isis. Together they searched. Together they wept. Every town that claimed to hold a relic of Osiris became a holy place, for in each fragment lay the essence of resurrection. Piece by piece they gathered him, until only one was missing, lost to the depths of the Nile. But Isis, with her magic and her devotion, fashioned what was gone, and with chance and breath, she brought Osiris whole again. She spread her wings above him, like a kite hovering over the fields, and in that sacred moment she conceived Horus, the falcon child, heir to his father, avenger of injustice, guardian of Mat. Though Osiris would never again walk among the living, he was reborn in another realm, the underworld, where he reigned as judge of the dead. The cycle was complete, life yielding to death, death yielding to renewal, the seed falling to earth only to rise again in harvest. Osiris became not merely a god of kingship but of resurrection, the promise that every soul, when weighed against truth, might rise from darkness into eternal light. For the Egyptians, this myth was not only a story but a mirror of the seasons. of the river of their own hearts. Each year Osiris died when the fields dried, when the Nile receded. And each year he rose again with the flood, when the waters returned and the land bloomed. The mourning of Isis became the mourning of every family who buried their dead. The search for fragments became the rituals of burial, the wrapping of linen, the offerings of bread and beer. To bury a loved one was to become Isis, piecing the body together, speaking words of magic, summoning life from silence. In every funeral rite, Osiris was present, and in every grieving heart Isis whispered, reminding them that love endures beyond decay. But in this myth lay also the truth of rivalry, of conflict that never ends. Seth, though defeated, was not destroyed. He remained a force of violence, of desert storms, of division and rage. Horus would grow to challenge him, a cycle of battle repeated in heaven as on earth. Order against chaos, green against red, river against desert. The throne of Egypt itself was the prize, and in every king the people saw Horus renewed, protector of harmony. Yet they also knew Seth could never be erased, for without chaos there is no order, without storm there is no calm. Thus the myth was not a tale of triumph, but of balance, fragile and eternal. A reminder that life has always lived upon the edge of shadow. Imagine the priests chanting in temples by torchlight, retelling this story as the incense curled upward like the breath of Isis herself. The statues of Osiris, wrapped in linen and painted green, were paraded through the fields to awaken the crops. Women wailed as Isis wailed, men bowed as Nephthys bowed, children followed as Horus once followed. The story was not confined to stone walls, but lived in bodies, lived in voices, lived in the rhythm of planting and harvest. Each repetition renewed the bond between mortal and divine, reminding them that they too were part of the eternal weaving. Each sorrow and each joy a reflection of the gods. And so, in Osiris we learn the truth of loss and the truth of return. We see that death is not an end but a passage, that grief is not a weakness but a bridge, that love is stronger than the cutting of Seth's blade. We learn that each life is scattered, torn by the desert winds, but that memory and devotion can piece it together, can call forth the soul anew. This is not merely their myth, but our own reflection. For in every loss we endure, in every absence we feel, there is the whisper of Isis searching, there is the promise of Osiris rising, there is the falcon cry of Horus in the morning sky. And when we remember, truly remember, we keep the sun afloat, we keep the Nile flowing, we keep the story alive. When Horus was born, he was not merely a child, but a fragile flame in the endless storm. Conceived in secret by Isis after Osiris's death, he was carried in her womb as both hope and defiance. She hid among the papyrus reeds of the Nile, cradling her unborn son away from the gaze of Seth, who sought to extinguish every trace of Osiris's legacy. The swamp became her sanctuary, the whisper of reeds her lullaby, the cry of ibis her protection. Nephthys watched over her, guarding in silence, while scorpions crawled at her feet as shields against venom and betrayal. When Horus emerged into the light, Isis lifted him to the dawn, and the falcons circled overhead, their wings cutting across the sky as if to announce the rise of a new era. Yet this birth was not safety, it was only the beginning of an eternal struggle. For Horus was the child of resurrection, but Seth remained the lord of destruction, and their conflict would shape the destiny of gods and men alike. As Horus grew, Isis taught him not only the magic of words, but the strength of memory. She whispered into him the sorrow of Osiris, the truth of betrayal, the need for Mart. balance against chaos. She wrapped him in hymns like linen. She nourished him with faith as much as with milk. And when he was strong enough, Horus rose to challenge Seth for the throne of Egypt. This was not a single battle fought in a single night, but a war of generations, echoing through heaven and earth, carved into myth like scars upon flesh. The land itself became their battlefield, the river their witness, the desert their arena. Horus, falcon of the sky, brought the wind and the gaze of justice. Seth, beast of the storm, brought thunder and sand, his body twisting like a tempest that could not be tamed. The tales of their combat are many, each told with reverence, each holding a different reflection of truth. In one telling, Horus and Seth transformed into hippopotamuses, plunging into the Nile, thrashing in its depths for days. In another, Seth tore out the eye of Horus, leaving him blinded, scarred by rage. Isis wept at this wound, and her tears mingled with the river until the waters swelled. But the eye was not lost forever. Thoth, god of wisdom and writing, restored it, healing not only Horus but the balance of the world. This restored eye, called the Wadjet, became a symbol of protection and wholeness. Painted upon tombs, carved into amulets, worn by sailors, placed upon the dead. To wear it was to carry the light of Horus, to defy the darkness of Seth, to claim the healing of a wound that never entirely vanishes but still becomes sacred. The gods themselves, gathered to judge the conflict, sitting in a divine tribunal. Ra, the sun, presided, weary of the discord, while the Ennead, the great nine, debated who should rule. Some argued for Horus, rightful heir of Osiris, child of resurrection, embodiment of order. Others saw in Seth the strength of chaos, necessary to defend the sun on its nightly voyage, a force too powerful to be cast aside. For years, the tribunal wavered, the gods themselves divided, and in their indecision, the war stretched on. Horus and Seth clashed in river and desert, in sky and shadow, each wound deepening the myth, each scar carving new meaning into the cosmos. In one tale, Seth assaulted Horus, seeking not only to defeat him, but to humiliate him. Yet Horus, guided by Isis, turned the act into reversal, exposing Seth's weakness before the tribunal. In another tale, Isis intervened directly, capturing Seth with a magical trap, but her mercy, her release of him, angered Horus, who felt betrayed by her compassion. Such were the complexities of their struggle, not of pure victory or defeat, but of wounds, forgiveness, anger, and fragile reconciliation. The myths do not hide these fractures, for in them lies the truth of life, where love and rage, mercy and vengeance, weave together into the same tapestry at last. After countless battles and trials, after blood and dust, after the tribunal's endless debates, the throne was awarded to Horus. He became the king, not merely of the gods, but of every pharaoh who would walk the earth. For in each ruler, the people saw Horus incarnate, protector of Mot, keeper of harmony, heir of Osiris, defender against Seth. The pharaoh was not simply a mortal king, but the living falcon, the axis where heaven touched earth. And in Seth, though defeated, they did not see an enemy erased. They saw a force still needed, a chaos bound but not destroyed, a storm harnessed to defend Ra from Apophis in the nightly voyage. Thus order and chaos became partners, bound in eternal necessity, each holding the other in check, each essential to the survival of the world. The myth of Horus and Seth was not simply a tale of rivalry. It was a lesson carved into eternity that justice is not swift, that balance is not easily won, that harmony must be struggled for across generations. The loss of the eye, the healing of Thoth, the tribunal's indecision, the mercy of Isis, the rage of Horus, all of it reflected the complexity of Marat. The truth that justice is not simple but layered, fragile and yet essential. To live in Egypt was to live in this balance between river and desert, flood and drought, life and death, light and shadow. To wear the eye of Horus was to declare faith in healing, to believe that wounds could be turned into strength, that scars could become protection, that even brokenness could be sacred. And so the myth did not end with victory, but with an ongoing reminder. Each sunrise was Horus's triumph. Each storm on the horizon was Seth's persistence. Each pharaoh crowned was a new echo of Horus's ascension, yet each desert wind was a whisper of Seth's defiance. The people lived within this rhythm, neither despairing nor expecting perfection, but honoring the eternal cycle where both falcon and storm had their place. They knew that to forget this balance was to fall into darkness, but to remember it was to walk in harmony with the gods. Imagine standing in a temple of Horus at the walls carved with hieroglyphs that tell of his battles, the columns rising like lotus stalks into the sky. Imagine the priests chanting, the people offering bread, beer, and flowers, the children gazing at the falcon statues with eyes of awe. The story was alive not only in stone, but in every breath of the living, in every judgment passed, in every crown placed upon a ruler's head. For the story of Horus and Seth was not distant, it was the very heartbeat of Egypt. A reminder that every moment, every choice, was part of the eternal weighing, the eternal struggle for Ma. And so we see in Horus not only the falcon god, but the reflection of every soul that seeks justice, every heart that seeks balance, every life torn by loss yet healed by remembrance. We see in Seth not only the destroyer, but the truth of chaos that shadows every journey, the necessary storm that sharpens the edge of peace. Together they remind us that harmony is not the absence of conflict, but the art of living with it, the art of binding storm to sun, wound to healing, chaos to order. This truth is ancient, but it is not gone. It lingers in us still, whispering through every sunrise, every shadow, every fragile balance we carry. When the body of a mortal was laid in its tomb, wrapped in linen, blessed with oils, sealed with prayers, it was not the end, but the beginning of the soul's greatest voyage. Death in Egypt was not silence but transition, the passing from one realm to another, guided by gods, guarded by spells, measured by truth. The body was preserved so that the soul might recognize its home. For they believed that the Ka, the life force, and the Ba, the spirit that could take the shape of a bird, would reunite in the afterlife, resting in the tomb by night and roaming by day. Yet beyond the tomb stretched the Duat, the realm of shadows and passage, and through it every soul had to walk, carrying the weight of its life, carrying the truth of its heart. It was here, in the halls of judgment, that the destiny of each soul was decided. Eternal peace or eternal silence. The heart, not the brain, was seen as the seat of memory and conscience, the vessel of truth. Within its chambers lay every thought, every word, every deed. To reach eternity, a soul's heart had to be lighter than the feather of Mat, the goddess of balance and justice. In the hall of two truths, the soul stood before Osiris, lord of the underworld, enthroned in green majesty, flanked by Isis and Nephthys, crowned with the Ataf, holding the crook and flail. Before him stretched a vast hall lined with 42 assessors, divine judges who each represented a law, a truth, a commandment. To them the soul declared its innocence, reciting the negative confession: I have not stolen, I have not killed, I have not lied, I have not polluted the river, I have not neglected the gods. Each denial was a plea, each denial a weaving of memory into purity. Then came the weighing. The heart was placed upon a scale opposite the feather of mat, white and weightless, the symbol of harmony that bound the cosmos. Anubis, jackal-headed god of embalming, guardian of the dead, adjusted the balance with careful hand. Thoth, ibis-headed god of writing, stood ready with his palette and read, recording the outcome with precision. If the heart was heavy, laden with lies, cruelty, and betrayal, the scale tilted, and the soul was cast down to Amet, the devourer, part lion, part hippopotamus, part crocodile, who waited hungrily at the foot of the scales. To be consumed by Amet was not torment, but obliteration, the erasure of memory, the vanishing into silence, worse than any suffering. But if the heart was lighter, balanced with the feather, then the soul was declared true of voice, Makeru, and welcomed into the field of reeds, the eternal paradise where the blessed dead lived in harmony, harvesting, feasting, singing. Forever, the field of reeds was not an alien heaven but a reflection of Egypt perfected. There the Nile flowed without end, the fields yielded grain without toil, families were reunited, and the gods walked among the people as companions. Each soul lived as it had on earth, but free from hunger, free from pain, free from sorrow. It was not a distant, otherworldly paradise, but a mirror of the homeland, Egypt eternal, Egypt without decay. This vision gave comfort to the living, for in their daily labor they saw a rehearsal for eternity, and in their funerary rites they saw preparation for their own rebirth to aid the dead in their passage. The living inscribed spells and hymns upon papyrus scrolls, upon coffins, upon tomb walls. These texts, called the Book of the Dead, though the Egyptians themselves named it the Book of Coming Forth by Day, were maps for the soul, guides through the dangers of the Dawat. They named the guardians of gates, they spoke the words that opened doors. They described the paths through rivers of fire, fields of knives, lakes of serpents. Each spell was a torch against the dark, each hymn a rope across the abyss. Wealthy families purchased long scrolls, covered with spells and painted with vignettes of the soul's journey. Even the poor sought fragments, short prayers, a single spell carved on a shard of pottery. For every voice, every word of memory was a step closer to eternity. The rituals of embalming too were part of this sacred preparation. Priests, dressed as Anubis, tended the body, removing organs, drying the flesh with natron, wrapping each limb with linen, inscribing protective words, placing amulets between the layers. The heart scarab, a green stone carved with spells, was placed upon the chest, inscribed with pleas to the heart itself: do not betray me in the judgment hall, do not weigh heavy against me. The mask of the dead, painted with gold, bore the features of the living, for they believed the Khan needed to recognize its form. When the mummy was complete, when the rituals were finished, the body was laid within its coffin, within its tomb, and the door was sealed with prayers. Yet this sealing was not a closing, but an opening. The moment when the soul stepped forth into the Duat, carrying the hopes of the living, carrying the memory of the world. Imagine the funeral of a pharaoh, the valley echoing with chants, the priests raising their hands, the air thick with incense. Imagine the procession of mourners, wailing as Isis and Nephthys once wailed, their cries rising into the desert sky. The tomb, deep in the earth, glows with painted walls. The sun's journey inscribed in gold and blue, stars glittering in pigment, serpents coiling in red. The sarcophagus rests in its chamber, heavy as eternity, and around it offerings are placed. Food, drink, clothing, weapons, everything needed for the journey. This was not burial, but preparation, not silence, but promise. For the Egyptians believed the soul would awaken, walk through the halls of Mat, stand before the scales, and, if true of voice, rise again with Ra at dawn, reborn in the light. But the judgment was not only for kings, it was for every soul, every farmer, every fisherman, every mother and child. All would stand before the scales, all would face their heart, all would be measured by truth. In this belief lay a profound equality, a reminder that no matter one's rank, no matter one's wealth, the heart alone carried the weight of eternity. The pharaoh might build tombs of stone, the poor might rest beneath the sand, yet both would face Osiris, both would speak before the judges, both would weigh their hearts. This vision bound the people together, reminding them that life was sacred, that justice mattered, that every deed was inscribed upon the heart like hieroglyphs upon papyrus. The myth of the weighing of the heart endures not because of fear but because of hope. It tells us that the soul is not judged by power or wealth but by truth. It tells us that memory matters, that kindness endures, that cruelty cannot be hidden, that love is lighter than gold. It tells us that death is not an end but a passage, that eternity is not a distant dream but the flowering of truth in the fields of the blessed. And in this vision we see not only Egypt but ourselves. For who among us does not carry the weight of memory? Who among us does not yearn for lightness? Who among us does not hope that when measured, our hearts might rise like feathers in the wind? When the soul had spoken its truth, when the heart had risen or fallen on the scales, the journey did not end. For the afterlife was not a single gate, but an endless procession of thresholds, each bound to the rhythm of the sun. In Egypt, the passage of Ra, the solar deity, through the heavens by day and through the Duat by night, was the great cosmic heartbeat. His rising was life, his setting was death, and his return each dawn was the promise that no darkness could endure forever. Just as the soul of the departed sought renewal in the field of reeds, so too did the universe itself rehearse the mystery of rebirth in the nightly voyage of Ra across the hidden waters of the underworld each evening. As the sun sank beneath the horizon, Ra entered his sacred bark, the Manjet boat, and began his descent. By day he had sailed the sky, illuminating the world with his golden rays, granting life to plants, animals, and humankind. But at sunset, the river of the heavens bent downward, curving into shadow, and Ra's journey led him into the winding caverns of the Duat, a realm both perilous and holy. His bark became the Mesektet, the night boat, and with him traveled divine companions, guardians against the terrors that lurked in the abyss. He was not alone, for none could sail the Duat without allies, just as no soul could cross into eternity without guidance. The Duat was mapped in sacred books of the night, carved on tomb walls and painted on papyrus. Its landscape was not one of endless shadow, but a labyrinth of regions, each ruled by its own gods, each guarded by spirits and serpents. There were rivers of fire that glowed with living flame, and lakes of water that offered refreshment to the weary. There were fields where stars were sown like seeds, caverns where the gods of yesterday slept, waiting to awaken. The duat was a mirror of the world above, yet distorted, dreamlike, filled with obstacles that tested the strength of Ra and of the souls that followed his path. At every hour of the night, the bark approached a gate, and at each gate stood guardians who demanded secret words, names of power, truths spoken with conviction. Without the correct words, even Ra himself could not pass. Thoth recorded each crossing, keeping the cosmic order in balance, while Mat, the eternal law, traveled with Ra to ensure that harmony was not lost in the chaos of the abyss. The gods who rode with Ra included Sire, the personification of perception, Hu, the embodiment of divine command, and Heka, the magic that bound all things together. Their presence was essential, for knowledge, speech, and magic were the weapons by which chaos was overcome. But the greatest threat awaited in the deepest hour of night. Apophis, the serpent of chaos, vast and coiling, dwelt in the shadows, waiting to swallow the sun. He was the eternal enemy, not a god, but the embodiment of unmaking, the endless darkness that sought to devour light. Each night he rose against Ra, stretching his jaws across the waters, his body encircling the boat, his hiss like the wind of oblivion. And each night, the gods fought him back. Spears pierced his coils, spells bound his jaws, knives cut his flesh. And yet he was never slain, for chaos cannot be destroyed, only resisted, only held at bay. This eternal struggle was not a flaw, but a truth. For without the tension between order and chaos, the universe could not endure. To the Egyptians, the nightly defeat of Apophis was as real as the sunrise. Each dawn proved that the struggle had been won, that Ra had emerged from the duat, that light still prevailed. Priests recited spells to aid Ra in his battle, drawing serpent effigies and stabbing them, burning them, cursing them, so that their magic would strengthen the sun god's hand. The people awoke to the sunrise with gratitude, for it meant that the universe still stood, that Mat was upheld, that life would continue. Every sunrise was not merely a natural cycle, but a triumph, a renewal of creation, a promise that the world was still alive. The souls of the dead, too, sought to join this journey. In tomb texts, they prayed to accompany Ra on his nightly voyage, to ride the bark, to share in the battle against Apophis, to emerge at dawn reborn with the sun. For to be reborn with Ra was to share in eternity, to rise again from death as the sun rose from shadow. The union of the soul with the cycle of the sun was the deepest hope, the purest promise. In the hours of darkness, the soul was not alone, but part of the great cosmic procession, sailing with gods, facing chaos, overcoming shadow. And yet, this myth was more than cosmic. It was also intimate, a reflection of human life itself. Each day was a birth, each night a death, each dawn a resurrection. Sleep mirrored the passage through the duat, the unconscious journey through shadow, the awakening to light. In this way, every person lived the rhythm of Ra, carrying within them the eternal cycle, the truth that death is not final, that life is a continual rising. Even in the smallest moments, the Egyptians saw the pattern of eternity. The sun in the sky, the seed in the earth, the soul and the body, all bound by the same law, all moving through the same rhythm of death and renewal. The walls of tombs in the Valley of the Kings are covered with these visions, painted in bright colors, inscribed with hymns and maps. There we see Ra in his bark, sailing through caverns, facing serpents, greeted by gods. We see the souls of the dead rising to meet him, offering their hands, joining the procession. We see the stars painted in deep blue, the hieroglyphs glowing with gold, the images eternalized in stone so that the journey would never be forgotten. Each pharaoh sought to carry these maps with him, to secure his passage, to ensure that he too would sail with Ra, that his kingdom would continue, that Egypt itself would not fall into darkness. And as the sun god sailed, his body changed. By day he was a falcon, youthful and strong, soaring high. By night he became an old man, weary but wise, needing protection, needing support. Yet at the deepest hour of midnight, he merged with Osiris, lord of the underworld, the god of resurrection. Together they became one, the living sun and the dead king, joined in mystery. This union was the turning point, the moment when night bent toward dawn, when shadow yielded to light. At that moment, Ra was renewed, his old form shed, his young body reborn, and the bark surged forward, carrying him to the horizon, when at last the eastern sky brightened, when the first light touched the desert, when the stars faded into silence. The people of Egypt saw in the sunrise the proof of eternity. Ra had triumphed, Apophis had been bound, the gates of the Duat had opened, and the sun rose anew. Each day was creation repeated, each dawn a reminder that the cosmos endured, that order held firm, that chaos had not devoured the world. And within that rising was the promise for every soul, that just as the sun rose, so too could the dead rise. So too could life emerge from death. Thus the journey of Ra through the Duat was not only the myth of the sun, but the myth of all existence. It was the rhythm of the cosmos, the rhythm of the heart, the rhythm of the Nile, rising and falling, flowing and returning. It told the people that even in darkness there is passage, even in death there is renewal, even in silence there is the promise of song. And so the people lived in reverence of this truth, lighting candles at dusk, praying at dawn, knowing that their own lives mirrored the sun, knowing that when they too entered the Duat, they would sail with Ra face Apophis and rise again in the eternal morning. Long before the souls of mortals weighed their hearts, long before Ra sailed his bark through the 12 gates of night, there was the story that defined Egypt more than any other, the tale of Osiris, Isis, and Horus. It was not only a myth of gods, but a memory of kingship, a memory of family, a memory of love stronger than death. In the fields of Egypt, where wheat grew tall and the river fed the land, Osiris reigned as a just king. He brought law to chaos. He taught men to sow and harvest. He guided them to live with Mat, the balance that sustains all. His queen was Isis, wise and powerful, mistress of magic, guardian of the throne, whose devotion to him would echo through eternity. Together they ruled not only with strength, but with compassion, and Egypt flourished beneath their care. Yet, in every order lies the shadow of envy, and in every story of harmony lurks the threat of betrayal. Seth, brother of Osiris, lord of the desert, master of storms and disorder, looked upon the fertile land with hatred. He ruled the barren sands, the red waste beyond the green valley, and he envied his brother's abundance, his people, his love. Seth was not without strength, yet his spirit was restless, twisted by desire, and he plotted to unseat Osiris. He built a chest, carved of cedar, inlaid with gold, shaped to fit only one body. At a banquet he brought it forth, a gift draped in beauty, and he declared it would belong to the one who fit within it perfectly. One by one the guests lay within, and one by one they rose, until Osiris, innocent and trusting, lowered himself into the chest. In an instant, Seth and his followers slammed the lid, sealed it with molten lead, and hurled it into the Nile. The waters closed above, and the river carried away the king. The land mourned, for the heart of Egypt had been torn away. Crops withered, the people wailed, the temples echoed with silence. But Isis, wife and queen, did not surrender. Her grief was boundless, yet within it lay determination, the strength to search the ends of the earth for her beloved. With wings spread like a hawk she flew, with tears streaming she wandered the marshes, the shores, the seas. At last she found the chest, carried to Byblus, resting beneath the trunk of a great tree that had grown around it. With words of magic, she reclaimed it. She brought it home. She hid it in the marshes of the delta. But Seth's eyes never closed, and when he found it, rage filled his hands. He tore open the chest. He dragged the body of Osiris, and in fury he cut it into 14 pieces, scattering them across Egypt, casting them into river, desert, and marsh. What could love do against such cruelty? What could grief do against such destruction? Isis, undaunted, began her second search. With the aid of Nephthys, her sister, with the guidance of Anubis, guardian of the dead, she gathered the pieces one by one. Each place where she found a fragment became sacred, each shrine a memory of the broken king. Piece by piece she reassembled him, her hands tender, her spells weaving flesh to flesh. When at last the body was whole, though incomplete, Isis beat her wings above him, breathing life, whispering magic, and Osiris stirred. Yet he could not walk the earth again, for he belonged now to the realm beyond. He became lord of the underworld, judge of the dead, ruler of the silent ones. His throne was no longer in the fields of Egypt, but in the halls beneath, where every soul would come to be weighed. But the story did not end in death, for Isis carried within her the seed of renewal. In secret, she conceived a son, Horus, falcon-headed, child of the throne, heir to Osiris. She hid him in the papyrus marshes, raising him in silence, shielding him from Seth's wrath. Scorpions guarded his cradle, magic encircled his bed, and Isis poured her love into him as both mother and protector. Horus grew, his eyes fierce as the sun, his wings strong as the falcon, his heart set upon justice. When he came of age, he challenged Seth, for the throne of Egypt could not remain in the hands of disorder. The battles of Horus and Seth raged across heaven and earth, long and bitter, echoing the struggle of Ra and Apollo. Order and chaos bound in endless contest. They fought as hippos in the river. They fought as lions in the desert. They clashed with spears and with spells. In one tale, Seth tore out the eye of Horus, shattering its light, but Thoth restored it, piecing it back together, making it whole again. This restored eye, the Wadjet, became the symbol of protection, health, and wholeness, offered to Osiris as a gift, as a healing, as the restoration of harmony. The eye of Horus shone not only in heaven but in amulets worn by the living, in carvings on tombs, in paintings on coffins, for it was the eternal promise that what is broken can be made whole. In the end, Horus triumphed, and the gods themselves judged in his favor. He took the throne of Egypt. He ruled as the living pharaoh, while Osiris reigned over the dead. Together they bound the two realms, life and death, earth and underworld, time and eternity. Every pharaoh thereafter was seen as the living Horus, the heir of the falcon, while at death he became Osiris, lord of the silent. the cycle repeated without end. A sacred rhythm binding king and god, life and afterlife. One unbroken chain across the centuries. The myth of Osiris was not only a story, but the very foundation of Egyptian faith. It explained why the dead were embalmed, why tombs were built, why the heart was weighed. It explained why the pharaoh was both man and god, why order must be defended, why love endures even beyond death. It gave the people the assurance that though bodies may decay, though kingdoms may fall, the soul could rise again, just as Osiris rose, just as Horus triumphed, just as the sun returned each dawn. The grief of Isis became the devotion of a nation. Her search became their ritual, her triumph their hope. Even now, when we look upon the temples, the pyramids, the painted walls, we see not only stone but memory, not only images but echoes. We hear the wings of Isis beating above her fallen king. We see the falcon eyes of Horus blazing against the desert sky. We feel the weight of Seth's envy, the silence of Osiris's tomb, the whispers of eternity carried on the river. In the myth we find not fantasy but reflection, not distance but closeness, for within it lies the truth of human longing. We too fear loss. We too yearn for wholeness. We too seek to rise when all seems broken. And so the tale of Osiris endures, not as a relic but as a pulse, not as a forgotten story but as the lifeblood of Egypt's memory. It tells us that death is not defeat, that love is stronger than silence, that justice can rise from betrayal. It tells us that in the heart of darkness there is always a spark of renewal, that in the scattering of pieces there is always the hope of gathering, that in the end, order and harmony will prevail. And as the Nile flows, as the sun rises, as the stars wheel above the desert, we remember. For the myth is not past but present, not theirs but ours, a sacred rhythm still beating within the chambers of time. And so, our journey through ancient Egyptian myths comes to an end. If your soul longs for more journeys into history's shadows, take my hand and subscribe, for the past is never truly gone. It only waits for someone to listen. In our next voyage, we will step into the forgotten roads of ancient Mesopotamia, another chapter carved into the stones of time. Until then, may the echoes of the past follow you into your dreams, and may you wake ready for the next legend. Good night.